Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
A breakthrough in Minsk as Putin announces a ceasefire deal following marathon talks to end the fighting in East Ukraine. The Russian president said the truce would come into effect on Sunday and that the withdrawal of heavy artillery would take place over the next 2 weeks. It comes after more than 16 hours of talks in the Belarusian capital between the leaders of France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine in a last push for a diplomatic solution to the conflict, which has killed more than 5,000 people. Earlier, a compromise looked shaky as the Ukrainian president told reporters certain conditions from Russia were unacceptable and representatives of pro-Russian rebels had refused to sign. However, the leaders confirmed the respect of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, with special status for rebel-held regions. Poroshenko said they also agreed to help return rebel-held borders with Russia to Kiev's control. The deal was confirmed by the French president, who warned there was still much work to be done, a sentiment echoed by Berlin. The failure of previous ceasefires has led to skepticism over whether the latest effort will last.
Welcome. Joining me to discuss the latest on the crisis in Ukraine is Matthew Dubas, editor of the New Jersey-based publication The Ukrainian Weekly, which is a major source of news and information for members of the Ukrainian community throughout the United States and Canada. Mr. Dubas, with the full support of the newspaper's management team, will present an editorial, which is directed at President Obama, the members of his cabinet, and the general public. He will also explain how the deteriorating situations have placed family members and friends in serious danger, and what the consequences will be if the president and his advisors maintain a wait-and-see approach on the escalating conflicts. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to the show, Mr. Dubas.
Thank you, G-Man. It's good to be back.
Now, I'm just going to get out of your way and let you do your thing, so floor is yours.
The situation in Ukraine is tense following the Minsk II agreement between Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine. The question we all have is why wasn't the U.S. there or the other signatory of the '94 Budapest Memorandum, Great Britain? This is where the Obama administration's hands-off approach is flawed and in the good cop, bad cop routine. However, the blame is shared by our European allies, some with military ties to Russia, like Germany and France. We need time to form a consensus on any action, but also have a false sense of security in Europe. We understand the need to be in step with our allies, but sometimes leaders need to lead. The U.S. Congress authorized President Obama to arm Ukraine and provide humanitarian aid with the Ukraine Freedom Support Act passed in December, but thus far, the president has been hinting that he will arm Ukraine in a wait-and-see approach, which does not boost confidence in Ukraine and could potentially provide Putin the time he needs to take the strategic rail hub at Debaltseve and make further inroads towards the port city of Mariupol. This would put the Minsk II agreement as DOA come midnight Sunday when the ceasefire is scheduled to begin, if Putin is able to take the rail hub by Sunday. If Putin is stopped, he may break the ceasefire anyway, as he has done in the past. The economic sanctions against Russia and its proxies, the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, must remain in place and should be ratcheted up. Sanctions are working to cripple the Russian economy, but sanctions never reversed an illegal occupation as we have in eastern Ukraine and in Crimea. What is needed now is a deterrent against further Russian aggression in Europe. It is time to arm Ukraine in addition to the recently announced U.S. military cooperation and training with Ukraine that is set to begin in March. The risk of not arming Ukraine is far higher, not only for the U.S. but for Europe. It's time to follow words with action to increase costs for Russia, not appeasement. Now, regarding any negotiations with Putin, the U.S. and the international community needs to treat Putin's Russia like a terrorist punk that it is. We didn't negotiate with terrorists, we hunt them down. Lest we need to remind the world of the terrorist attack on civilian airliner flight MH17. That same resolve we show IS should be shown Russia. It would at least show some sort of continuity and stance on terrorism. Other steps that can be taken include to revoke Russia's permanent seat on the UN Security Council as a state sponsor of terrorism. Ukraine's parliament has shown such initiative when it earlier this month designated Russia as an aggressor state and listed the DPR and LPR as terrorist organizations. The world would do well to follow Ukraine's lead. I am the product of Ukrainians who fled their homeland during the Second World War due to the Soviet invasion of Ukraine after Nazi Germany terrorized Europe and was advancing on Moscow. My parents came to the U.S. as children with their parents who hoped for a new life that was free from fear and at peace in a land where opportunity was everywhere. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who lived and died during that war are experiencing the same from its rogue neighbor Russia. Ukraine and Europe are at a teetering point due to Russia's war against European institutions like the European Union and NATO, while Ukraine takes the brunt of the abuse as East plays against West. Family members on my father's side who reside in Berdyansk in Zaporizhia Oblast, approximately 50 miles west of Mariupol, which was shelled in a Russian terrorist attack recently. Family members there tell of the horrors living on the doorstep of a war zone, and the stories under Russian control are even far worse from what we hear from the Russian-held Donbas areas and Crimea. In addition, as editor of the Ukrainian Weekly newspaper, which was founded in 1933 to fill an information gap in the English-language press about the famine genocide of Ukraine, known as the Holodomor, that claimed millions of Ukrainian lives under the orders of Joseph Stalin, I perhaps understand the situation better than most. This latest Minsk meeting has allowed Russia to spin it any way that it wants, as long as it is positive to its own agenda against Ukraine. Claiming that they're not even in Ukraine, they aren't even part of this agreement. While the European leaders have their expectations of fulfillment and adherence to it according to Western norms, Ukraine is left to defend itself in the face of Russian aggression that threatens all of Europe. This entire strategy of negotiations is flawed when Russia is not expected to stick to its word, whether as a signatory or verbally to any sort of agreement, like the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which has proven to be just a piece of paper that Russia has trampled on. The US and UK, the other signatories and guarantors of Ukraine's territorial integrity, since it gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, have yet to militarily defend Ukraine from Russia's actions. Sanctions have not deterred Putin or his minions who parade as separatists in the Donbas, as more Ukrainian land is taken by force under Russian control. Ukrainians will be converging in Washington on March 4th to the 5th for another round of Ukrainian Days advocacy events, where Ukrainians will meet with congressmen and senators to encourage support for Ukraine and new legislation that calls for the immediate release of Lieutenant Nadia Savchenko, who is being illegally imprisoned in Russia. She is in her 60th day of a hunger strike and protest, and her health is deteriorating.
Will the Ukrainian Weekly be present at that protest?
Yes. Ukraine's problems are the world's problems, whether we like it or not. Russia must be built a blow so that his actions do not upset the international established order of European peace, which has held since World War II. The war in Europe threatens this long-held peace, and Europe, with the support from the U.S., must decide whether the military solution will be strong and swift or miscalculated and drawn out. There's also talk of a military alliance between Poland, Ukraine, and Lithuania. France has even said it would be sending tanks to Poland for training purposes. How this will all come together is anyone's guess, and many people are making comparisons between the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and how the Mujahideen were armed with Stinger missiles, which increased the costs for the Soviets, and many say contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Mujahideen later became the Taliban, but this sort of threat is not present in Ukraine. Also telling is that his longtime dictator partner in crime, President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has started to buck the Kremlin trend and is seeking closer ties with the West, even to the point of trying to stave off a Russian invasion of Belarus by saying that such action would be seen as an act of war. These are all positive signs coming from Belarus, and I think Lithuania and Poland showing such commitment to something that the rest of Europe really has to come on board with. With this Minsk II agreement, I think there's too much in favor for Russia to either back out or to not say that it needs to adhere to the agreement terms. This is something that the White House will have to tweak in its approach with Russia, and something that we're going to be keeping an eye on.
Would you say that Ukrainians in your country primarily support President Poroshenko at this point, or do you get the sense that they feel he isn't being a strong enough leader on this subject?
I think that there is overall positive support for Poroshenko in Ukraine from the electorate. I think majority of the people are simply cautious and watching his every step to make sure that he is not giving up any portion of Ukraine in any of these negotiations, which he really hasn't. It's a matter of Ukraine taking control of its own borders. And we have yet to see how Russia is going to play in that equation.
I thank you and the management of the Ukrainian Weekly for choosing this venue to address the President, his cabinet, and the public, Mr. Dubas.
Thank you, G-Man.
Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.